So welcome to our May Twin Ports Climate Conversation. My name is Madison Rodman, and I'm a Resilience Extension Educator with Minnesota Sea Grant. Today, we'll be hearing about identifying strategies and opportunities to accelerate climate adaptation in the Western Lake Superior region. Our speaker today will be Dr. Heidi Roop, who is an Assistant Professor of Climate Science and Extension Specialist of Climate Science at the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate at the University of Minnesota. We want to thank all the groups involved with making Twin Ports Climate Conversations possible, which includes Wisconsin Sea Grant, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, the 1854 Treaty Authority, Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at the Minnesota DNR, Minnesota Sea Grant, NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. So thanks to all these organizations that help make TPCC possible. I want to share our TPCC mission if you're not familiar with it. So Twin Ports Climate Conversations has a broad mission, and it really is aiding in improving climate change conversation skills for all. We're going to improve climate change related data sharing and collection, motivate and support community-based adaptation, increase the climate change conversation in more sectors to broaden our impact, and a new mission is to include and consider climate justice in our conversations when possible. So today especially, we invite you here at TPCC to consider our mission and to contribute to our collective ideas as we work together towards community resilience in our region. Also, I would like to let you know that we've recorded TPCC since the beginning of 2020, and we have those recordings available for your perusal at other times. So we'll make sure to put a link in the chat box for a link to those recordings where you can access them on our Minnesota Sea Grant website. Again, we invite you to use that chat box to submit questions for our speaker, and we will have time for a few Q&A questions with Heidi after her presentation. And with that, it's my pleasure today to introduce Heidi Roop. So Dr. Heidi Roop is an Assistant Professor of Climate Science at the University of Minnesota, Minnesota's Climate Change Extension Specialist. Her research and extension programs combine cutting-edge climate science, communication, and the principles of knowledge co-production to increase the use and integration of future climate change information in decision-making at a range of scales, from city and state to national and international levels. By producing actionable, relevant, and user-informed climate science products and tools, Heidi helps diverse stakeholders prepare for and manage the risks of a changing climate. Her climate science research has led her around the world, where she's participated in research from Greenland to Antarctica to the mountains of Vietnam and New Zealand. In addition to her appointments at the University of Minnesota, she's an affiliate assistant professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Washington. And with that, a warm welcome to Heidi, and I will stop sharing my screen, and Heidi, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Madison. Appreciate the invitation, and to the rest of the organizing team for what I know is a whole host of work and effort that goes on behind the scenes to pull off these events. So thank you so much for that excellent coordination, and to all of you on the call today for participating. Without sort of stealing my thunder here, our discussion today will be around identifying strategies and opportunities for accelerating climate adaptation. And I don't have all the answers. That's where you all come in. And so we'll be spending a bulk of our time together today, leveraging your expertise and knowledge and the barriers you face when you think about doing adaptation work or identifying what those priorities are. So I know that there is a lot of expertise that I see people logging on. So I'm really excited to brainstorm and to explore the themes of sort of strategies and opportunities in climate adaptation with you all. So I'm going to cruise through just some sort of context setting and some framing for this discussion around what do we mean about climate adaptation, and what does it look like, and what are some of the sort of theoretical framings that we use when you think about adaptation to sort of seed our conversation and interaction that we'll have for the remainder of our time together. Let's see. Here we go. So today I'm representing the University of Minnesota and Extension, and critically the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is currently hosted by the University of Minnesota, but works in close collaboration and shares leadership with a variety of state agencies, federal agencies, regional and local jurisdictions, and public and private entities and nonprofits. Together, we are exploring sort of the opportunities and challenges of adaptation here in Minnesota and sharing best practices. We're in the process of building out the Climate Adaptation Partnership. You're probably most familiar with our flagship activity, which is an annual climate adaptation conference. Again, we're a statewide group, one of the only multi-sector statewide groups working on climate adaptation. Here's an example of the organizations that are engaged in our sort of leadership team. And we feel really lucky to be able to convene such thought leaders to explore how it is that we accelerate adaptation around the region. This, of course, works in partnership and benefits from work like that of the TPCC and the work that you represent, that many of you represent in your organization. So we'll explore adaptation, and I recognize we're sort of one player in this really rich field of work related to adaptation. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm having so much struggle here with my keyboard. Our priority programming as an organization, we really are working on providing trusted, regionally relevant climate change information. One of our big pushes right now is trying to leverage the expertise at the University of Minnesota and our supercomputing power to provide more high resolution, dynamically downscaled climate information, but supported with the necessary training and capacity building we know is required to use that type of data well when we think about how it is we plan and prepare for a changing climate. We're invested in supporting adaptation planning and providing trainings and amplifying and building on existing programs that provide rich and robust adaptation training around the region. We really are invested in building peer-to-peer networks and sharing best practices related to adaptation, play a central role in convening leaders across the region, and we work to be a champion of climate literacy across all sectors and age groups. So stepping away from MCAP and into this idea of adaptation and climate, and why do we need climate adaptation, is that our exposure to climate impacts, and this is true today and even in the past, right? Our exposure to climate-driven events and impacts is largely dependent upon how well we understand those impacts and when they might occur, and the extent to which we manage for them effectively, that we build robust systems and communities to be responsive and have the ability to be protected and bounce back or bounce forward after we experience, say, a negative impact related to a climate-driven event like storm surge event, or is the case of sort of something like a derecho or any other natural hazard. When we think about climate change, sort of how we feel climate change, I've been really excited to see the narrative around adaptation, this concept of preparation, being proactive rather than reactive when it comes to climate and climate change. It's really been it's woven into our narrative in the media and our discussions more than it has been, I'd say, even in the last 5 years. And we understand well that the extent to which we sort of feel climate change really depends both on how much we prevent further warming through aggressive reductions in the emissions of greenhouse gases. This is mitigation. But we have to partner that with adaptation, this preparation piece, because we know we've already set certain changes in motion. We certainly choose the extent to which we warm and therefore change our planet's climate system. But we also know we have the imperative to prepare, and we know we benefit from being proactive in that preparation rather than always responding. There's a lot of benefits in being proactive, even if you just boil it down to cost. We know that we can save money by being prepared today for things we are anticipating to worsen in the future. And if we can balance this equation right, and we won't always get it right, we have a better chance of having kind of climate ready communities, infrastructure, economies, ecosystems. And so there's a real benefit here, right? We all benefit from really investing in both pieces of this pie. So we're going to be talking today about adaptation. And adaptation involves actions and investments that reduce our exposure to these increasing climate change related risks. But we face this conundrum when we think about how to prepare. There's, of course, uncertainty when we look towards the future. Climate models are not crystal balls. They provide a range of possible futures and associated probabilities, but it's up to us to decide sort of what is feasible for us to plan for. And there's a whole bunch of competing priorities and drivers that influence that decision. But we also know that we can't be prepared for everything, but we also we can't afford to always prepare for the worst case. And we also can't afford to be unprepared. So what do we do? And this is where we'll all come into discussion with one another. So I don't have all the answers. And if I did, I don't know, if we all came up with the answers, we'd probably get a Nobel Prize. There are thousands of people on the planet working on this. And of course, these are often place and context specific decisions. So what works in one community might not work in another. So we really have to try to avoid adopting sort of one size fits all approaches, which makes it challenging to do some of this work. So to reduce our exposure, of course, it means that the climate science alone is insufficient. We have to understand and address factors that influence the adoption of new practices or new data or new forms of uncertainty. And so what this really means is that we're trying to fit climate science and future climate science into this complex systems of sort of politics and economic drivers and community values and public opinion to hopefully arrive at sort of designing and shaping the communities that we all hope we will be able to live and thrive in the future moving forward. And so when we think critically about, well, what does that mean? What does it mean for climate knowledge? I worked with some of my colleagues at the Climate Impacts Group in Washington State, and this is sort of the theory of change that we use to inform our work, which is thinking about building climate resilience and adaptation. We sort of have to have kind of 4 key building blocks. One of those is knowledge. So we have to have salient, credible, and legitimate information. It has to exist and it has to be readily available by the people that we need to use it or who want to use it. People also have to be motivated and interested and driven to act in a way that uses this information and works towards sort of a climate, I don't necessarily a climate smart way, but a climate informed way. We're using and onboarding the information in our decision making. Of course, resources have to be available and skills have to exist to use the information, meaning you have to either have it as part of your job or it needs to be a priority and it needs to have financial resources. And we're going to interrogate these more deeply using your expertise here in our interaction and the interactive component of our time together today. And then, of course, we also have, there to be authority. The guidance, policies, regulatory frameworks, legal structures have to exist and be in place that enable and empower decisions to be made that use this information. So we're often designing differently, we're taking on new approaches, we're incorporating new uncertainty. And sometimes the sort of authority piece isn't there, and we haven't really thought about how do we actually implement this and what needs to be in place from a sort of regulation side of things or an organizational management side of things that would lead to the incorporation and adoption of climate change related information and lead to these sort of resilience or adaptation related decisions. And I'm just going to close with sort of a framing. There are leaders and you on this call contribute to this leadership. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has identified kind of key investment areas with significant potential to reduce climate related risks and enhance resilience. So I'm going to outline those as a framing for our conversation. So here's what the IPCC says. That we need locally specific scientific information about future climate-related risks and the consequences of those risks as a means to empower public and private entities to both understand their risks and manage for them. So we need information, we need education and capacity building about those risks and how they can be factored into today's decisions in order to build resilience for tomorrow. We also need to consider nature-based adaptation approaches. So those approaches that enhance climate resilience for both ecosystems and the built environment. So that's one of their key priority areas. And they also call for improved coordination and collaboration across a whole range of disciplines and sectors to enable the integration of adaptation into a whole host of areas where climate-related decisions are already being made and where it's imperative that we start thinking about how climate change influences the calculus of our understanding of risk moving forward. And this is across jurisdictions, sectors, geopolitical boundaries, geographic boundaries. And so I think those all together provide us with a really rich framing for thinking about what as a region you need in order to accelerate adaptation. So we have this sort of framing, but what does that actually look like in practice, right? We cannot separate sort of the theory from the reality. And so we understand what we need more of, but how do we get there? And that's where our interactive discussion will come in together. So I think I'm going to just prompt our short Q&A with the sort of idea of sort of how do we coordinate and collaborate specifically for the climate related risks that you all are managing for. And then we'll do a quick Q&A, and then I'll queue up our activity that will build on these ideas a bit more. So I'm going to stop sharing and answer some questions.
Great, thanks, Heidi. So we have a few minutes